Hail and well met, traveler. Welcome to the Tavern. Did you know this is the place where more than half of the greatest adventures in history have begun? But before those adventurers took their first steps, they watched and calculated who would join their party. Why, look over there. There's a mighty barbarian from the Frozen Lands. Strong, mighty, full of honor and wisdom. I happen to know that one. They go by Matt Rossi. And look over there to the right. That woman working away on her mechanical dog. She's cunning, witty, and I've seen her bounce more than her fair share of ne'er-do-wells out of here before I can even blink. I happen to know that she goes by the name Liz Harper. And me? Oh, my name's Joe Perez. And I'll be your tavern keep. Welcome to Tavern Watch. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another wonderful episode of Tavern Watch. Our party is joined once again by our normal three. However, we have expanded today, welcoming back, you've probably heard him on several of our other podcasts, Phil, otherwise known as Stoppable Force. How you doing, Phil?
Hi, I'm your new guest character for this episode. I'm good. I'm doing real good.
And you're like the NPC we've adopted instead of killing, despite the DM's best efforts.
I'm the goblin. I'm the goblin with the dumb name that you all loved.
You joke, but I remember I was running a game for my wife when we first got married, and one of our friends who had a young kid who was also playing, and they adopted a kobold that then saved that party's life because I couldn't roll less than a 19 when I was rolling for that kobold. Like, I would roll crap rolls, and I was rolling right in front of them. I would roll a crap roll for, like, me, like the villains and so forth, and then the kobold, who had literally been adopted because they liked that he drank milk, I am not making this up, he busted out so many crits that it was just like, what is happening now?
Yeah.
This kobold was intended to be dead like 30 minutes ago, not this.
I think every party has done that at one point. Like, the one that is most famous in my game world is Bob the Goblin, who, when you guys played in Otherwell, the party that had run before you, which had been 10 years in game time advanced, or in the past, adopted this goblin when they raided a goblin camp and wound up, like, murdering a whole bunch of goblins before realizing that they were being press-ganged into service by like this weird, like, druid who had gone absolutely insane. And the one party member felt bad because she killed his wife and, like, immediately just, like, adopted, protected him. He was, like, the perfect cinnamon roll. They trained him. He became their chef. And then eventually became a folk hero because I kept rolling so good for him. Like, he wound up getting, like, he was a barbarian. It was completely weird. And then the party's darkest moment, like, they thought all was lost, and Bob launched himself out of a catapult at the big bad. And so, like, there's a statue in the main city devoted to Bob, erected by the party for his noble sacrifice of essentially flinging himself 150 feet at a god. It was ridiculous how it wound up from this throwaway character that was just there to make them feel bad originally, and then they just adopted him and turned him into the mascot. I think everybody's got a story like that. Everybody who's run a game has some feral party that just adopts everything they shouldn't. But, well, we're going to talk more about tabletop because we have a ton of news to cover. But before we get started, I do want to kind of go around and ask a couple very simple opening questions. Let's start with, what are you guys reading right now? So there's a lot of books that have come out since the last time we recorded. So what are you currently burying your nose into? We'll start with Phil since he's our guest.
Sure. So I've been reading a few things, partly as prep for an article I'm writing, teaser, but also just because I went on vacation and I took RPGs with me, like a big nerd. I've been spending a lot of time reading Shadow Dark, which I gushed about in an article on Blizzard Watch, and I honestly think I may have undersold how good I think this game is. it's so good. Outside of that, I've been putting some time into reading Break, which is an RPG I got back in July. I did not have a lot of time to really dive into. It also won an NE award for Best Family Game, which is kind of weird. I would say it's one of maybe 2 tabletop games I know of that specifically tries to emulate the experience of like playing a Final Fantasy or a Tales of game, like specifically the feel of a Japanese video game RPG. I would say Break and Fabula Ultima are the 2 that are solidly in that category. And it's interesting. If you've ever wanted to play a murder princess, that is an actual class in Break. Or if you've ever wanted, showing its anime influences here, there is a species, or it's an actual species that is an isekai human. They have been transported into the game world from the real world, and they have their own set of like expertises and things because of that. It's a really neat setting. I'm not sure I'm jiving with the rules, but like any game, there's stuff you can pull from it.
All right, Liz, what about you?
Well, obviously, I've been going into the new D&D Player's Handbook. Mixed reviews, but I've been enjoying it. I think it's a beautiful book. And I just picked up the Candala Obscura book, which not new, but I haven't gotten into the book, but though I've seen people play it. And mostly I'm wondering, how am I supposed to have time to do all of these things? I don't know. Trying.
Fair. Matt?
A while back, I actually made an entry for the Chaosium, basic role-playing contest that they had going, a design contest. I never heard back. I have no idea what's going on with that. But I've been messing around with the system ever since, just because it's a new system. Although it's not a new system, it's a very old system.
New to you.
Not even new to me. This is basically the same role-playing game that they've been doing since the Golorantha days. They have not changed it a lot. It's if you've ever played Call of Cthulhu, if you've ever played the Stormbringer / Ulrich game, if you've ever played Superworld or Nephilim, it's that game. It's a very, very hoary old system, and I mean that in a good way, not in a bad way. I just have been, I don't know, I've been going over old stuff. They've got RPGs up on their site. They've got PDFs for Nephilim or Superworld. Remember Superworld?
Mm-hmm.
Possibly the first RPG about, based on a superhero role-playing game, comic book type stuff. They have that, and I've been going over that. And it's really weird because I don't know if we have time for me to really go into detail on this, but everybody who doesn't like George R.R. Martin for whatever reason, the thing about him is that I've always got a soft spot for him, despite the stuff he's done that I don't agree with, just because his role-playing game that he ran in Superworld essentially inspired an entire book series, the Wild Cards books.
Mm-hmm.
It was based on the role-playing game that he and a bunch of his fellow writers were playing in. And the characters from that RPG became main characters in that series of books that they all worked on collaboratively. So if not for Superworld, we probably wouldn't have Game of Thrones / an Age, a Song of Ice and Fire, because George R.R. Martin's interconnected network of people comes from the role-playing game that he ran. It's one of those things that always freaks me out when I think about it. And I loved Superworld way back. This was a game I played before I played. I think I played it before I played anything, except D&D, which is a game like D&D everybody played. I think everyone in my generation broke their teeth on D&D, but Superworld was right up there. And now they have the PDF, and I can just, it's it was $8, so I picked it up and I've been reading it. And it's not it is a product of its time, let's say, but I do find it interesting. It is kind of Spark. I really want to run a Supers game when I get done with Starfinder, which is the other thing the Starfinder test is out. You can get the complete rules for the play test, which is something that they do at Paizo. They put out essentially an entire rule book to play test the whole thing.
Yeah,
it's a alpha release of the entire game, which I have, and I really hope to run it. But in the meantime, I've been going over that because it's just interesting to see how they changed up from the first edition, and it's a significant change. Like it's big how much they've changed. So yeah, that's basically it.
Fair enough. And me, I mean, I've talked about it on the main podcast, but I've been buried in DC 20, just reading over it because they're doing a lot of Dungeon Coach is doing basically the same thing that Paizo's doing. It's essentially the entire book. And it is the beta versions, until they get to the final release. But every time they have an update, they update the PDF and you get to experience or basically have access to the full game. Which is really cool. I like when game companies do that. It makes it very easy to sort of make a decision about the game, or at least feel like you get to experience it. And also it gives you an opportunity as a player during that time. Like at least Dungeon Coach is soliciting feedback. And I'm enjoying watching the game sort of get created in real time. Like watching the Discord server that they're on, like go back and forth with the actual creators, talk about the rules and, you know, hey, this doesn't make sense or this doesn't feel great. Like we understand maybe what you're trying to do here. Maybe try this instead. And like watch that sort of feedback actually be listened to, and then have a full release, beta version go to everybody. So I've been buried into the multiple hundreds of pages of that, trying to get a feel for it. Are any of you, go ahead.
I was gonna say, it really does feel like the whole like open development approach is really like taking off now. Paizo's done it for a while. I know you've been able to even like purchase playtest copies of the books for a while.
Yeah, you can buy a hardcover version. Yep.
Yeah, they show up in my half price books every now and again. But like Joe said, DC 20's doing it. Daggerheart is essentially being developed in the open.
Oh yeah, Daggerheart's been absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah, whatever the official name is it for now, the MCDM RPG is to a certain extent. I mean, it's Patreon backed, but it's still there. It's like $1 a month, and you get to see pretty much everything as it goes. So I really like this approach that's happening now in a lot of these bigger RPGs.
Yeah, I think it's kind of important too because like it breeds investment into the game and into what you're doing, and at least from what I've experienced with players in general, the more engaged we are, generally the better received your product's going to be. And not every game company listens to feedback or develops in the open like that, which we're going to talk about in a little bit here. What are you guys playing, if anything? I know I'm currently not in any games right now. Are any of you playing anything right now?
Yeah, I'll jump in. Tomorrow is actually going to be a day where I'm in both of my D&D games at once. I'm running, I would say, the final third of a heavily modified Descent into Avernus tomorrow for my real life group, and then I come home and I'm an online game playing a wizard who's also a gremlin.
Nice. Liz, Matt, are either of you playing anything currently?
No, that's why I'm trying to get the Starfinder thing happening. I'm like, oh god, I need to be in a game. Why am I not playing anything?
I mean, we are trying to get. I'm trying to Jenga everyone's schedules together and get a few games going this month and next. I've been playing a game of someone else is running it, and I'm just like, okay, whatever. But I play game. I think it's called Dolmenwood, which is kind of this like weird, eerie fantasy setting that was kickstartered. And I'm told it's like an old school sort of D&D style, but I play a cat. I'm a Grimmelken, and I'm playing up the cat thing. I climb places. I turn into a cat and I climb places and I knock things over, and yeah, it's great. It's
a sentient cat from the Winter Court. What could go wrong?
It's fine. Trust me, I'm a very trustworthy cat. I really am.
Yeah, Dolmenwood is... So I alluded at one point in my article about games that were essentially just old versions of D&D. And one that I called out specifically was Old School Essentials.
Yep. I'm currently wearing an Old School Essentials shirt right now, actually.
There you go. Yeah, it's literally like you can actually... like they're very upfront that it is a cleaned up version of BX D&D, and they actually have the change log on their website of what they changed before publishing the book. Dolmenwood is the same publishers, so yeah, you're essentially playing like the D&D I grew up with, but as a cat from the Winter Court.
That's like, it's funny because you're talking about that kind of thing. It's like what they used to call, or what they still call, legacy or retro gaming type stuff. One of the games that I actually played most recently, I would say 4 months ago, I ran a month-long game for some old friends that then we don't contact each other physically. We don't live anywhere near each other, so it was all online. Called, I don't know if you guys have ever heard of it, called FASERIP, FASERIP.
Oh yeah, the old Marvel RPG, right?
Yeah, exactly. It is. They can't say it, so they can't use the exact same names for things. But as they pointed out, you can't trademark a game. The game systems aren't trademarkable. They can't be copyrighted. The rules on how to play a game are public domain the second that you make them. So they basically reverse engineered the old Marvel game. And the thing is the old Marvel game was good in a lot of ways, but oh my lord, was it complicated in others? Like it was back when they loved charts. You know what I mean? Like you'd have a chart with the difficulty of what you wanted to do, and it was just like, here's the point where you can't do it. So yeah, that was weird to run. It's kind of like you hit like an iceberg of old stuff. I never played a lot of I've never played Old School Essentials or any of the others. There was that one that was basically really, really going in hard on being just original Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. Mm-hmm. I can't remember its name, but I want to say OSR maybe.
OSE actually has the advanced D&D thing too. Buddy of mine in my real life group, just so you can buy them in two different forms. You can buy them as like an add-on to the regular Old School Essentials, which basically tells you here's what's different, or you can actually buy a player's handbook and DMG of the advanced Old School Essentials. So there's two different ways to do it. A buddy of mine just got that. I suspect he wants to run it pretty soon. I'm kind of hoping him to talk him into that instead of DCC, because I don't really want to buy a bunch of weird dice that I'll never use for any other game, like D7s.
Yeah, fair. And this question may actually already be answered by some of our responses already, but what are we looking forward to? I know personally, I'm very much looking forward to the Starfinder game. I love Starfinder. It was a game that I can't get anybody locally to play with me ever for whatever reason. Everybody's like, oh, we're just gonna play Star Wars, and it's like, but this game is right here and it's good. So I'm looking forward to that. What about you guys?
I'm gonna have to jump in now. I'm sorry. I don't mean to interrupt you because you were done. But Starfinder is definitely something I want to run and play and all that stuff. I'm looking forward to it a lot. But also I desperately want to adapt all these game settings that either have games but I don't like those games, or don't have games. Like the Mass Effect one shot I ran a while back, I basically used Powered by the Apocalypse for it. And there's nothing wrong with Powered by the Apocalypse as a system, but I want to see what I can do with Mass Effect and Starfield. Starfinder, sorry. I keep saying Starfield. I'm playing that a lot too, but that's not involved.
I think the Starfinder rules would be a good fit for that, I think.
I would agree.
Kind of Mass Effect vibes from it, of course.
Yeah. The thing is that you basically just kind of have to adapt the alien races, but the alien races that they actually have in Starfinder, I feel like I could just do a palette swap on some of them and make it work. And a lot of it you could just call it biotics and be done. There's a lot. I think it would be pretty easy. The one that I also want to do, well, we'll talk about that because it's in later. But yeah, there's a lot of stuff I think you could do with Starfinder, and I'm really interested in playing around with it. I think there's the bare bones of a solid Supers game in here, and that's kind of tweaking my head right now. Is that a good idea? To sit around and try to make a Supers game out of Starfinder?
The thing is, just Paizo in general, or at least in my opinion, you can adapt anything to anything if you want to. Some systems make it easier than others. Starfinder just happens to have some of the things that are analogous already baked in. But you can do it with other settings as well. Supers is something that is an interesting genre, which we can probably devote an entire episode to, of games that did well or didn't do well at all, and what the strengths and merits of them all. But I think that's a topic for another time. So I guess Liz and Phil, what are you looking forward to coming up, if anything?
I mean, I'm also looking forward to playing some games, just playing stuff with y'all, because we're going to try to do 4 different games in the next 2 months, and we'll see if that happens. And just really get going on some things. And I think we don't know exactly what we're doing because you wanted to DC 20, Joe. I think I have that right.
Yep.
Phil's going to do a Blades in the Dark game. Matt is, of course, doing Starfinder. And it's just going to be interesting to see how it turns out. I haven't been playing a lot of games lately because, schedules. And I'm just really looking forward.
So,
that's kind of been that kind of stopped me from running games for a while because time, existence. But yeah, I'm just looking forward to playing some things again. I just started the Dolmen One game like a couple of weeks ago. We started doing that, and I'm just interested in playing some things. It's great.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to the Starfinder game. This might sound weird to some people. I'm looking forward to this Descent into Avernus game wrapping up. Not because I'm like this game, but just because like I like when things have an end that is satisfying in some way. And I feel like this is actually like I think it's on its way to being good here. But yeah, I'm looking forward to Starfinder. I'm really looking forward to running Blades for you guys because I've been brushing up on that. As far as a physical object that is coming to me soon, I finally bought a physical copy of Thirsty Sword Lesbians, and that is on its way to me. I think it shipped today, actually. So shout out to Evil Hat for shipping on a Saturday.
Oh yeah, they're real good about that.
I love those guys. It took so much not to blow so many dollars there because there's so many games. Like I really want a copy. Like I really want a copy of Apocalypse Keys. I really want a copy of. God, there was something else they had on there, but I confine myself to one game for now. But we'll see.
Often my problem as well. But I think that's going to do it for our opening. I think it's time we move into the larger set of topics here, which I guess we'll just open with the biggest one, which is. Man, Wizards is going to be in the news a lot, and we'll start with the upcoming the Player's Handbook is out. Liz has been talking about it, and there's a bunch more coming. So go ahead.
I do want to say something about the Player's Handbook that I think is interesting. The official release date is September 17th. As we're recording this, it is not September 17th. Wizards of the Coast has been doing early releases for pre-orders on D&D Beyond, but this time I went into my friendly local game store and I picked up a physical copy on September the 3rd because they're doing early access via local game stores, which I think is really neat because they have kind of been cutting local game stores out of the loop with all the digital content they're pushing. So I am really glad.
I need you guys to talk for about an hour and a half. I'll be right back. I need to go to my local game store and see if they have it in. So yeah, Edmonton Warp 1, if you guys have it there. I'm seriously like, I can't really afford it, but yeah.
And the thing, I don't really understand what Wizards of the Coast is trying to do here. Are they trying to cut them out, or are they trying to help them? Because they go back and forth so much. But I'm really glad to have this physical copy right now. The alternate covers at local game stores, exceedingly beautiful. Mm-hmm. Like, I just want to collect them because they are beautiful in a way that the normal editions are not. You can't just buy it on Amazon. You wouldn't get this. So, I just think it's interesting. Early access from your local friendly game store.
Yeah, I will say
like the alternate covers, especially feel like, and the fact that they're doing the dual purchase thing now really does feel like a nod to local game stores. You're right though on it being absolutely beautiful. They've been doing that for a while. I almost bought.
Oh
yeah. It was Keys from the Golden Vault. Like I don't necessarily know that I want to run it, but dang, I almost bought the alternate cover when I saw it in the store because it's so pretty. It's art.
Oh yeah, I got that on my shelf.
Yeah, it's
they did that with the golden. I want to say not gold, the Golden Staircase, but that's not the right.
Radiant? Is it Radiant Staircase?
Tales from the Eternal Staircase.
Yes, the covers for Eternal Staircase is like really, some of them are amazing.
Their alternate cover arts are always really, really good. Like I have like the alternate art for the Deck of Many Things book. I have the Plane Chase alternate art set. Like they're usually very gorgeous. Their art assets are almost always really well done. And the new Player's Handbook is no exception, right? It's absolutely gorgeous. There's a lot of art, not necessarily a lot of new art, but the layout is very distinct. The way that basically every page has art on it, right? Like,
yeah, and so a lot of it actually is new. Like I don't have the physical book, but I have early access to the digital book because a friend of mine shares books because we've run games together online, has bought it one night while he was less than sober. Thanks, Dave. But I've been browsing it, and like, it is a lot of the art that I know is in the new book, and it's so gorgeous. And I'm really glad they put it online too, so I can at least appreciate it there if I don't have the physical book.
Yeah, and they also dipped into their other IPs. So like they have a lot of art that was made for the Adventures in the Forgotten Realms and the Battle for Baldur's Gate Magic the Gathering sets. And a lot of the art in the book is actually from that. So players may not have seen it before because they're formerly Magic cards, or at least currently Magic cards. So I think that's also really interesting that they're reusing that art.
For God's sakes, just release the plane shifts as one book, guys. Sorry, but if you know what I'm talking about, you know that those are like really fun and interesting, and then they just stop doing it.
But that's also because some of those folks are no longer with the company. So reviews on the book have been relatively mixed, and I think that's a fair statement to say. Some people have really enjoyed it. Some people have not. There's content creators online that have swapped between the two. So their initial impression was real good, and now they're starting to be a little more critical of the book as time goes on, and maybe part of that is algorithm fed, but a lot of it does feel like they've been maybe sitting with the book a little bit longer and have been having some thoughts on it. So
one of the people I looked at a lot, he's actually kind of gone back and forth on it. One of the things he did I thought was really funny was he sat down and broke down how every class has changed compared to its original version. And the one that really caught my eye was like the sorcerer, where he's talking about all the stuff sorcerers can do now. Like they can get pretty much everything back on a short rest. It's just kind of crazy how some classes have changed and other classes. I think every class feels at least a little different, but yeah.
I don't know that I would necessarily agree with that, but we can talk about that in a little bit.
He pretty much the way he showed each of them off, it felt very different in some ways. I'll just say that. But
I'll lean on Phil and Liz here, since I think you, aside from, I definitely have been spending some time with the book a little bit. What are your thoughts on it? We'll start with Liz, besides it just being gorgeous.
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing is, if you go in here expecting a new edition or expecting heavy revisions to Dungeons & Dragons, you're going to be disappointed, because this streamlines some gameplay, it changes up some things. I don't think it's going to seriously change how the game will play. I think the book has consolidated a lot of, errata over the past decade that has developed. It consolidates some of the stuff from Xanathar's Guide to Everything, Tasha's Cauldron of Everything, and, puts it all in one volume. It streamlines 5th edition. It adds some things. It has a lot more feats. It's kind of changed up the way you make characters by making backgrounds more important than races. So it's less how you were born and more what you choose to do. It gives a lot more flexibility to where you assign stats, but that was something we also saw in Tasha's Cauldron of Everything. So I think the book is great. I think it gives a lot more explanation on how to play. A while ago, I picked up the Pathfinder Player Core book, the revised edition, and, it devotes a lot of time to just kind of, this is how you play a game, just sort of some tabletop basics. This is what we're doing here. This is what you're sitting around a table and doing. And the original Player's Handbook really didn't have that. So this feels like something you see in more modern books, and the Player's Handbook, the 2014 edition, was starting to feel dated, because it was just not the way a lot of modern books are being done. A lot of modern books are taking that stress away from race and giving you more flexible options with your characters. I like the way every character is getting a feat at first level. When you create your characters, you can get an origin feat, because I think feats are really cool. I think those give you one of the most interesting ways to customize your character. And one of the things I really liked about Pathfinder was there were so many feats, and every time you take a feat, you're making your character a little different from every other character. And Dungeons & Dragons hasn't gone that far, but it is adding a little more customization than it had. But it's still a bunch of minor changes. It's not a new edition. I think the book is better across the board than the 2014 Player's Handbook.
Do you think it's
But
like a 0.5
it's not-
edition?
I don't even think it's a 0.5 edition.
I was going to say, I was going to give my opinion on that after Phil talked, but I don't think it's even at a 0.5.
So you say it's like a 0.25?
This is
If not even, I think it's
Yeah.
I still think it's core 5th edition. But Phil,
Yeah.
what do you think?
Yeah, I think it's definitely like 5e revision too. There is a lot of I like the way the way the book is organized a lot better now. There are a lot of times
Yeah.
where I can only find specific rules because D&D Beyond has a half decent search engine that I don't think I'll need to do that anymore. And I mean, they did clear up some of the weirder edge rule cases that have cropped up over 10 years of, since they produced the last one, like the whole thing where like if you revealed something was invisible, but it still had the invisible condition, like you could see them, but you still had disadvantage or something weird like that. It's like weird edge cases that where rules was written kind of didn't work. I feel like they've cleaned up a lot of those. I do like that all the classes now have more options. Like if you go back to just the 2014 Player's Handbook and you played a bard, you had two choices, Valor and Lore. That was it. I like that. I do like that they've expanded them. Although one thing that bugs me to death is that in the name of every class having 4 subclasses in the book, they cut wizards down to 4. So 5 of the schools of magic you can no longer specialize in with the 2024 rules.
Yeah, that was a weird choice.
Yeah, I assume that this is so they can then put out like Tasha's Guide to Magic and learn how the other 5 work and get like an updated war wizard or something later on. But it was a weird choice. But I can see why they did it, but it's still a weird choice. I do like the movement of things that weren't necessarily feats into feats. Like the choice of a stat improvement or a feat was always kind of weird. Now I can just say, okay, here's feats, and some of those include improving your stats. Or like Liz said, they thought the first level feat associated with a background is just like one of the most popular house rules in game now, which is cool. You don't have to worry about, whether your DM supports it or not. If they're using the 2024 rules, it's right there. It's good. Some of the choices they made in the name of making all the classes work the same, I still feel are a little weird. I feel the Warlock is the biggest weird thing now. You start out getting invocations right off the bat, which is cool. And they've kind of cleared up the weird, like, dissonance where you had pacts and you had invocations, but they worked differently and you got them at different levels. And now like your pacts are just invocations. That's fine. But now you don't have a patron until 3rd level. So you're just accepting a deal with a mysterious something that gives you, magic. And then at 3rd level, I guess they show up and go, hey, I'm a devil, kid. I mean, it's kind of weird, but overall, I feel like I don't feel like it's enough change to be a full revision. It just feels like a cleanup and like they're just implementing feedback over the last 10 years.
I just find myself confused. Like a lot of times, it feels like they decided to push stuff out to 3rd to make everything come out to 3rd level. Because some classes got it at 1st, but most got it at 3rd, so let's make it all be at 3rd. When the obvious and better solution would have been to make it all be at 1st level.
Yeah, and I think we've said that for a while. I think you're right. Like some of the stuff and choices that they made is interesting. Some of it is good. Some of it isn't really. Like I've noticed a couple things going through it myself, which is there's a lot more reliance on spells for classes to even things up, and I'm air quoting that with exaggerated hands. Like rangers get less class features now, but get more spells. And those spells are meant to replace class features, which is a little bit confusing. And like the warlock thing is a little bit confusing as well, or at least I understand what they're going for, but in my opinion, in an effort of making everything even, they're not making it fair, if that makes sense. I'm a big believer in fair, not equal, where if everything is fair, it's okay for one class to have 3 subclasses and one class like wizards to have like 9 schools to specialize into. But like when you start evening things out and you start taking away some of those choices, now wizards feel a little worse. Maybe not necessarily are worse mechanically, but they feel a little worse because some of that player agency has been taken away. And the decision, I said this on the main podcast and I'll say it again, the decision to take away like the ranger's ability to just like have that innate like sense of direction is kind of weird. because that was such a really cool, very flavorful ranger feature that I've heard a lot of people complain about. So I don't know necessarily, and I agree that it's not a 0.5. And I agree with Phil's assessment that it's like 5th edition version 2.0. But I think that's part of my criticism with the book is reading it. I don't think it does enough. Like it does some things, but it feels like a half measure.
There were some real bold steps they took at times in the UAs, and they got shouted down for it by people who just wanted to continue to play the same game forever rather than maybe have something new. And I kind of hate that some of that feedback was good. Like I didn't like the part where they shoved smites into the divine spell list and paladins completely lost their identity at that point, because why not just play a war cleric at that point? But I really feel like they may have acquiesced a little too much in the name of keeping things equal. I keep thinking of that quote from, and this is a really dumb thing to quote, The Incredibles. If everyone is super, no one is.
Yep. No, that's like, accurate, though.
They've made everything equivalent, and now some things, like everything feels kind of samey. But I don't know.
Yeah, and I think that's part of my problem with it is, or at least part of my criticism is that games where everything feels the same sort of loses that unique identity, which means your players, and this is just my experience, and this is, I know, anecdotal, but in game systems like that, players generally have less engagement or feel like they have less engagement. It also doesn't fix the largest problem I think D&D had, which is combat takes forever. And
it absolutely does.
And it's still going to take forever here. Like none of the stuff really changed.
Yeah, mechanically it isn't much different.
And they didn't do anything
initiative hasn't gone away.
Yeah.
It's all,
it's very swingy still. Like that's the other thing. Like initiative is very swingy. If you guys all roll poorly and I'm the DM and I roll well, I'm good luck. Like I hope that I don't nuke one of you off the table, and vice versa. Like if you all roll well and I roll poorly, my big bad might die before it ever gets a chance, or I have to like escape and I have to pull like the Xanatos like claws to get him out before like I even had a chance to do anything. And it can make encounters again not feel very fair one way or another. Mm-hmm. And I think that sort of takes a little bit of the fantasy away, because I can't help but compare it to 3rd and 3.5. And I know Phil and I know Matt played during that time because we've all had conversations about it. Liz, you weren't playing during that time, right?
No.
Okay. 3rd and 3.5 felt like 3rd edition had good bones but had a lot of problems. And then 3.5 said, okay, here's everything we can fix possibly to try to fix it. And it's a half edition. They even called it 3.5. And it did things like made clerics not unstoppable murder machines, which was like a thing that happened in 3rd edition.
And they tried to fix the fact that like some classes were essentially take 2 levels in this and then never look at it again.
Yeah. And this feels like they missed an opportunity to sort of do that. Again, part of that might be feedback, part of that might be from playtesting, and part of that might be internal design, but it wasn't a very open design process, so we don't know. Like we don't know what the impetus was behind some of it. I also find it interesting sorry, go ahead.
I think some of the problem here is marketing, because they did market it like it was going to be something new.
Mm-hmm. They really did.
I think they marketed it like this new thing. It's D&D 2024. It's this big exciting thing. And it's a light revision that consolidates some old content into a single place, into one book, so you just need the player's handbook instead of maybe several books that have all this content. And I think maybe if they'd pitched it that way, you would see less disappointment.
I think I would agree with that. And again, it's not to say that it's bad, but I want to make that perfectly clear. It's okay. Like like my opinion.
Yeah,
it exists. I'm cool with it. Go ahead.
Had this been the book they released in 2014, it would still have been good.
If this was the book that released in 2014, I would have been over the moon in 2014.
Yeah,
this would have been amazing in 2014. And I'm not gonna, I do think they did make some serious changes that are.
Well, there's stuff like, I think we should talk about feats if we're going to talk about the revamp, because feats are clearly the means by which they are attempting to make mechanical.
That's your customization. That's your customization options or feats.
Yeah, and it's. I think I said at the time that was the biggest way it felt like it was going back to 3rd edition,
mm-hmm.
because third edition was like feats, make feats, put feats everywhere, feats on tops of feats. It was like toppings on pizza. And that's not necessarily a problem for me. I do like having feats, but I'm trying to not sound negative here. I'm looking over the fighter. I look over the fighter every time I look at this. I'm looking over what the fighter is, because the thing Joe said about how they're throwing spells at classes to try and boost them up. And it's like, I don't know, like fighting styles are now feats. You gain more uses of second wind and you can do other things with second wind. It's like, guys, do you honestly think second wind is the thing people were really taking fighter levels for? I don't know. It's strange. I think that the subclasses for fighter are good, but they're also like the Battlemaster was always the best one. Do you know what I mean? Like in the 2014 release, Battlemaster is the best fighter subclass. Eldritch Knight was there if you wanted to be a Gish and you didn't want to like have to work too hard at it. And Champion was there as like, do you like critical hits? Would you like to have more of them? That's it. That's what this is for. You will level to level 3. You will take Champion and you will never look at fighter again. You will just now use your Barbarian to like get even more crits. That's what it was for. Now they've made them a little bit more. They have more identity. I straight up think the Battlemaster comes off even better. Like it just feels like a better version of what it was. The Champion feels more unique to a degree. It feels like it's got something going on besides just being the crit people. Eldritch Knight is almost exactly the same. I don't feel like there's anything about it that makes it different. And the Psy Warrior, Psy Warrior.
We're there. They're okay.
Yeah.
So you know what this reminds me of though, because Joe was talking about how for some classes like the Ranger, they've shoved class abilities into feats or into spells. For the fighter, they've pushed them into feats, which means they've gone back to the third edition Warrior design.
They're almost exactly
Their big thing is they get every level that they don't get a subclass feature for some reason. They get a feat. They get a feat every other level, which means you can pick up every fighting style if you wanted to. And I feel like the whole thing with them is they're designed to lean into the new weapon mastery feature.
Yeah, I was just going to bring that up.
Really cool. That I think is probably one of the biggest positive changes for this, is because weapons finally aren't just what's the one I can wield that's most effective to me that has a D8 die on it.
Yeah,
now, like the weapon mastery thing is really cool.
Yeah, and also the thing about the weapon mastery is that it makes it so you don't have the weird edge case of if I have anything that involves a critical hit, I should never, ever, ever, ever use a greatsword.
Yeah.
Because the greatsword uses 2d6 instead of 1d12, which means you only get another d6 when you crit. So you should always use a great axe.
But on the flip side of that, a greatsword has the Graze ability, which allows you to increase the consistency of weapon damage.
Yeah, now they do.
Right.
Through weapon mastery. Weapon mastery has made the greatsword
viable.
It's viable. And they've done it with a lot of the stuff. A lot of the weapons, it's now like, oh, I have a reason to do this. I have a reason to use these things. I have a reason to play around with like new designs.
The only thing I would say about that though is like, because of it, and it's a really cool idea, but it's another one that I think needed more time in the oven. And the reason I bring that up is like, compare Halberd with Great Axe.
Oh yeah.
Great Axe gets Cleave. That's fantastic. Cleave is phenomenal. Lets you do a second attack against a creature within 5 feet that's also within your reach. Cool. Get a halberd. A halberd also comes with reach and cleave. So if you are going to use a great axe, why wouldn't you possibly use a halberd, get more reach, have an extended on it, because now you have a 10-foot reach as opposed to 5-foot reach. Like some of that stuff feels like it needed a little more time to sort of poke through, right?
I mean, I get the thing with the halberd too. I don't want to talk about every possible thing that we got going on here, but the thing with the halberd is because the halberd is less damage, like it's a D10 versus a D12. And if you're one of those people who's nuts for crits, the halberd is not the optimal choice. But the halberd's the fact that it's got a 10-foot reach, and the fact that you can still use feats to make it even worse. Like you can use the halberd mastery type thing to hit people with the butt and so forth. The halberd is one of those weapons that, in the right hands of the player who knows what they're doing, can just completely battlefield control the area.
And it's not just warriors too. Like each weapon
Fighters.
has sort of.
I'm not letting you guys call them warriors. They're fighters.
I'm going to be.
I should be warriors. They absolutely should be warriors, but they're fighters. So
regardless, everybody knows what we're talking about. But regardless, like rogues with short swords. Like short swords come with, I believe it's called Vex. And you could play a swashbuckling rogue like this, where your short sword, if you hit a creature and deal damage, this mastery property gives you advantage on your next attack roll, which feeds into the rogues. Because it feeds into sneak attack and stuff like that. Yeah. So like there are things that let you do really cool things with the weapons.
It makes being a non-spellcasting character more interesting.
Agreed.
I will absolutely give it that. But at the same time, I think Phil's right on the money where a lot of this stuff feels like they're just shoving it over into feats, especially for the fighter and to a lesser degree the rogue.
And I mean, I forgot what the actual number is on it, but looking at it, there's not a whole lot of new feats, right? I think it's like
nope. It's pretty much the old feat list plus some of the ones like Shadow Touched and Fey Touched that came from other books. Plus,
I think there's like 14.
All the fighting styles.
Yeah, fighting styles, and like I think a couple other class mechanics that have turned into feats.
And there's some revamped ones, but I think it's like 14 that have been like changed or added versus or something like that. Like it's a relatively low number for the number of feats that are in the book, and there are a lot of feats in the book. And a lot of the spells that I think are in the same camp. I think there's like 30 spells that were altered or added from other sources, but were largely the spell list feels the same as well.
Yes, some of them took a real power shift. The one I know for sure got a serious nerf is spiritual weapon.
Yeah, that got way nerfed.
Requiring concentration makes that so much worse now.
That's horrifying. Like imagine that if you've ever used spiritual weapon. Thinking about now, it's basically I can't cast any spells now.
Yeah, it went from here's the thing I always take at second level as a cleric to why would I bother with this?
Well, it makes it a choice. And I mean, spiritual weapon could be extremely powerful because you could throw it up and then just go on and do your stuff. But now it's like I have to choose, like, do I want spiritual weapon or do I want bless? Do I want this or do I want bane? You know, you've got to make calls like that. And I think it's still pretty fair. I'm a little annoyed about rangers who continue to have the problem where you have Hunter's Mark. And, that's concentration. So you can never cast... And a lot of the ranger spells have been concentration. So you have to put Hunter's Mark because that's kind of your thing. But then that prevents you from doing a lot of other stuff. That problem has remained in this edition, even though they removed concentration from it in some of the playtest materials. It's back, and they have removed concentration from a lot of ranger spells, so it makes it easier to do Hunter's Mark and also do other stuff. But that's one of the things I thought felt really bad was that you had to make that choice, and one of those things was such a core class feature.
I know at one point during the playtest that they had taken. Yeah. They had made it a non-concentration thing. So the fact that they went back on that and then just made other things non-concentration seems weird. But,
I mean,
at one point it wasn't even a spell; it was just a thing they could do.
Yeah.
I thought that was a cool approach because
I thought that felt a lot better because you had your cool class thing, but then you could also cast spells. But it also now it's back to feeling like, okay, you have your cool class thing, but you got to choose that or like most of your ranger spells. Even though I do admit they cut concentration from a lot of ranger spells, which opens up your options for spellcasting.
Yeah, although I'll note that out of the two that they recommend for people who don't want to think too hard about your spell list, one of them right off the bat is concentration spell. Snaring Strike is concentration.
Now,
I
want to move a little bit away from this and talk a little bit about what's coming up for the upcoming book releases, because the Player's Handbook is obviously not the only one that's going to be available, which the official full release will be September 17th for anybody who did not pre-order or get it from a local game store, which if you didn't, well, go visit your local game store. Give them some love, please. But November 12th, we have the Dungeon Master's Guide, which we'll be releasing this year. And then February 18th of 2025, we will get the Monster Manual. Yes, the 2024 Monster Manual will be releasing in February of 2025. The reason that this is important, and some people have been commenting on this, is after the Monster Manual is released, all of these rules will be releasing into the SRD. The only thing that will not be hitting the SRD is, I think, subclasses and lore design things. But pretty much everything else is going to wind up going into the SRD. You guys can fact check me on that. I believe that's accurate.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's typically, yeah.
We have yet to see what the Dungeon Master's Guide or the Monster Manual are going to contain or look like. They are arguably as important as the Player's Handbook. The Dungeon Master's Guide telling you how to run extended campaigns and how to operate with, experience, etc., and things like that. And the Monster Manual for the stat blocks, I'm very curious to see what makes the cut and what doesn't, and what creatures, because they did mention they're going back through the history of D&D and maybe bringing back ones that were, left out of the 5th edition to begin with, or were very popular in third-party supplements. Like, I know Archfey were not covered in the Monster Manual. They were, however, covered in a third-party supplement that I currently have sitting on my shelf. Like stuff like that. So I'm curious to see what they do with that.
Yeah, I think we've seen glimpses of the stat blocks for the new Monster Manual, just in videos online and such, where they've, released them for other people to look at. And I think they do look way more usable. I'll be interested to see what the final version looks like, but so far what we've seen as far as an iteration looks good. A lot of the content that was repetitious or was boilerplate or was confusing seems to have taken a cut, and stat blocks are more compact and more usable all at the same time. But I'm really interested in the DMG. A lot of the stuff they've talked about in the DMG, both to help DMs world build and run campaigns and run adventures, as well as stuff that players need. What they've said sounds good, but
yeah, Liz, you were saying something.
One of the things is that there are some creature stat blocks in the Player's Handbook. I think I agree with Phil. They look easier to read, and certainly one of the nice and things that just make sense to have done things about the Player's Handbook is that if there is anything mentioned in the Player's Handbook as a thing, it has a stat block also in the Player's Handbook. And you think about that and it's like, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. But previously that was not the case.
Yeah, like for Druid Wild Shapes, where you had to just memorize your list of CR1 beasts from the Monster Manual.
Yeah, that's the thing. The Druid is changed around on how that works. So it's a lot easier for your player to just have a character ready to go there.
And maybe that's part of this. This is streamlining the classes in this way, where everyone gets a subclass at 3. The Druid Wild Shape doesn't require this comprehensive knowledge of every creature in the game, because you just have standardized stat blocks for your creatures. All of these things feel like they combine to make a game that is easier to pick up and play than maybe it was. So maybe that's part of this. They're making the game a little more approachable.
Which I think is the goal, right? And I think that's everybody's goal when you're making a tabletop game, is you want the game to be as approachable as possible, because the more approachable it is, the easier it to basically be picked up and played. And that's how you get new players. If you make it too complicated, people will not play it. And let's be honest, D&D back in its old day used to have hit tables before THAC0 was a thing. And THAC0 was an improvement. I'm just going to say that.
He's not wrong. If you went from like the D&D, gray book to THAC0 in AD&D, it was a revelation, and everyone was like, "My God, of course, it's so simple. The number has to be rolled below the level of the armor in order to hit it." And he's not wrong.
Now, these aren't the only books that are coming out. We've got a roadmap for some other ones that are going to be releasing as well. We have Dragon Anthology, which will be out in summer of 2025. We have the new starter set, which will be out fall of 2025. Starter sets were something that didn't show up at game stores originally. They were originally big box exclusives, and just recently started going to game stores before the new book started releasing. So I'm curious what their plan is with that. I don't think they've said, at least I haven't heard anything as a store runner.
No.
But it's supposed to be a box set that you can just grab and get your feet wet into the system without having to buy all of the books all at once to see if it's something you like. The only thing I question is a fall release for it, when I would have figured you would have wanted it in spring or summer, when kids are not in school, because that tends to be the demographic that you're trying to get onboarded, because if we're old, we've probably likely already been playing for a while.
I have a guess here. I'm going to point at Hasbro. Fall 2025 says Christmas release, which is
100%.
Absolutely think about it if you're a toy company.
Yeah, which I'm going to move away from that because I have some comments that are specific for Hasbro that I'll leave my frustrations at the door. The two other books that we know that are going to be releasing, which these are ones that I personally am excited for, is the Forgotten Realms Player's Guide and the Forgotten Realms Adventure Guide late into 2025. I like these types of books, and I wish there had been more of them throughout 5th edition's runtime, and I hope this sets a precedent. People that played 3rd edition or 3.5 will remember when a setting was released, it wasn't a campaign book. It wasn't just a setting book. It was these two things. It was a player's guide that let players have new character options, but that were immersive to the particular realm that you were in. And then there was an adventure guide for players and DMs, how to run a game, like things that are important, maps, stuff like that. And back in the day, we used to have some pretty good ones. That's where Eberron was born. That's where, Greyhawk got its teeth like really big in 3rd edition. Forgotten Realms, because Greyhawk was the default setting in 3rd edition. Forgotten Realms that's how it got added back into it, and so on and so forth. So it lets them potentially bring other settings that we've been begging for, or at least some of us have been begging for or talking about for a while. We might be able to get Dark Sun. We might be able to get Eberron again. We might be able to get all these other settings, but as a player's guide and an adventure guide, that means there's actually something that might be useful for them instead of just having a full like $70 book release, right?
I really want to see one of these come out for A, Dark Sun, like you mentioned, and B,
100%.
I want to see Dragonlance. I feel like Dragonlance had a fantastic 3rd edition book, and I feel the
5th edition book was not great.
No, the 5th edition run did Dragonlance dirty, and it's one of their like long running classic settings, and I really want to see it come back with this type of treatment. The only thing I don't like is that we're looking at the first one over a year from now.
Yeah, late 2025. I'm just going to say this, and then I'm going to let Liz talk. Congratulations, Wizards of the Coast / Hasbro, for picking the most boring choice for your new setting that you want everyone to play in. Thank you.
I think that though the choice is important because it is the most vanilla setting. It's your bog standard fantasy.
It isn't even that. I'm going to shut up. Liz, go ahead.
Well, I mean, one of the things they talked about with the Forgotten Realms guides is they want to kind of expand your options in this world and give you lots of settings that are in the Forgotten Realms that you could base different kinds of campaigns in. Like, a campaign that starts in Baldur's Gate is not going to be like a campaign that starts in Neverwinter, and they want to expand on what's available, not just in the cities, but just throughout the Forgotten Realms, and help you tell different kinds of stories that you might want to tell using this grander setting. It sounded good. We'll see how it turns out. But my biggest thought about the 2025 release schedule is how few books there are. We already knew the Monster Manual was coming out, and the only things they really announced for next year are a Dragon Anthology book, which didn't have a lot of details on it, and 2 Forgotten Realms books.
And considering they released their big Dragon book like last year.
Well, every edition or every new edition they release a Draconomicon. It's just what they do.
Yeah, but they've already done. I don't know.
This is not like like you're saying a Draconomicon. It's not a book about dragons. It's a book of dragon themed adventures. So it's an adventure anthology, like Candlekeep, like Radiant Citadel, like Keys from the Golden Vault.
So basically, considering the starter set is just it's a quick onboarding.
It's a pared out. It's a pared out version of the 3 core books.
So what you really have next year is the Monster Manual, which really doesn't count. 4 books. Yeah. So the Monster Manual doesn't count because it's really the 2024 Monster Manual.
It releases in 25. I think we have to count it. But go ahead.
I'm going to say that I don't count it. I'm not counting it for this. So you've got the Anthology of Adventures. You've got the starter set, which is not. So basically, you have two real releases, one of which is chopped up into 2 things, like the Forgotten Realms, the Player's Guide and the Adventure Guide. So that's 2 products.
One of them, one of them's One of them's geared towards players. One of them is more for dungeon masters.
So I'll throw the monster manual back in here now because as I was saying it, I felt, no, you're being unfair. So I'll throw that back in. So you have monster manual, the Dragon Anthology, and then the Forgotten Realms Player's Guide and Adventure Guide as new releases. Because if the starter set is basically just, here's how you play D&D. Do you like D&D now? Come buy it. Buy the real thing now that you've played this. So you really only have 4 releases.
But here's the question, though. Is that a bad thing? If the quality of them is good and if the content they provide is substantial enough, is that a bad thing? We talked about this before. There was a level of content fatigue, right? Like there's so many books. It's really hard to keep up on. A lot of players fell out of the hobby, at least in terms of purchasing stuff, because there was just too much to consume. It's a problem that we complain about on the Magic side as well. But if you release too much, people are disincentivized to buy your product, because if this book releases and then in 4 weeks another book releases and in 4 weeks another book releases, I can't keep up with that. And as a retailer, I saw that, right? Like all these releases, it didn't matter how good the Deck of Many Things book and cards were, which phenomenal, by the way. I will sing the praise of that product. It is one that unfortunately sits on shelves at a lot of stores, but it's one that people should look at. But it came in between 2 other things that were just, it couldn't compete with. It came in between Planescape and I forgot what else. And the Planescape was a complete box set of 3 books that was $150.
Like I think Spelljammer was there too, wasn't it?
No,
Spelljammer, then Planescape.
Spelljammer was its own thing, then Planescape.
I'm saying they might have been for releases. They might have released the Spelljammer thing, then Deck, then Planescape.
Yeah.
Am I remembering that correct? Yeah.
And that's the other thing too. Some of the releases they were doing were releases of 3 books at once, like those sets, right? I have enough of them sitting on my shelf that that's a lot to keep up with. And I think less books at higher quality is probably the way to go. So I'm not mad at that.
The thing is I don't necessarily see the higher quality thing is going to be happening.
Well,
and
we don't know.
We don't know. But the other thing is that I think that the problem we had with the release schedule they had before, you're probably about content fatigue. That's really well made. But I will say that some of the books they put out were phenomenally good.
Yes.
And even the ones that weren't phenomenally good, a lot of times it was like one really dumb mistake that hurt it the most. I'm looking at you, Spelljammer.
Yep.
A lot of those books were great. And then there was like the whole thing with the Hattazy and just a few real big stumbles that took a really great product and made it questionable.
But and again, part of that might have also been at the breakneck speed they were putting that out, though, right?
But here's the thing, man. We know that they had a lot more people working there. You know what I'm saying? Like
that is a fair point.
I feel like
I think we should. I was going to say I think we need to move away. We need to move away from the speculation on that and just take it for what's face value. We can judge these when they're released, and we can definitely review them. And I 100% plan to. But this isn't the only news. There are more things happening in the D&D world as well that I think we should probably also talk about a little bit. One, Project Sigil, the virtual tabletop beta, is coming this fall, which is very interesting because we've been hearing about it for a while now. We don't have any idea of what it's going to cost or what microtransactions are going to look like. We do know that it will, in fact, have microtransactions, but it's actually going to be a thing. It's going to be potentially moving away from being vaporware and be a tangible thing that you can have in, experience. So I'm curious to see what they do with that.
About that the other day, like about stuff becoming real that we all thought was vaporware. Oh, that was Dragon Age you were talking about.
Yeah, I was talking about Dragon Age. But this is, as Joe said, this is very similar. We keep hearing they're working on it, but we haven't heard much about it. So it's going to be interesting to see what it looks like when it comes out, just in beta.
Now, the interesting thing is that it's coming out in beta, and we've also gotten a recent interview with our, I'm going to air quote, favorite human being, Chris Cox, who said that Wizards of the Coast, air quote, Hasbro here, is going to be going all in on digital content in 2025, which means, and we already kind of knew this, there's going to be a lot of focus on digital releases as well as the virtual tabletop and those sort of microtransactions, which I can understand as a corporation they're going to want to look at because digital goods have way less overhead than physical goods, which means you can have a higher profit margin. I'm curious how deep that's going to go and like what those microtransactions are going to look like on that virtual tabletop. And if there's going to be things like exclusive content on digital release. We don't have any details. It literally is a quote from an interview. But with their current president of Wizards of the Coast being a former game developer from Blizzard.
And John Haidt.
Yeah. John Haidt is basically from that realm, but at least he plays the games and he plays them in meat space. So hopefully there'll be a balance there. But again, it's something we can't really speculate on yet. We're just going to have to see what happens when it releases.
I do think that there's at least a possible positive here. And I will, since I've been kind of negative, I'll throw this one out here. If they do this right, if they learn from what other VTTs have tried to do, especially since their VTT is going to be kind of like almost a video game, or at least that was the thing they were originally sold. If they work the content that they already own properly, this could be a really good thing for people who are just trying to play a D&D virtually. Because they have a lot of possible stuff they can do. So I will say that much. That's a positive. That's a positive I can see.
I mean, is there? I guess I'll put this question out there for everybody. What would you like to see from their virtual tabletop and their offering when we get to the beta in this fall? Like, what would you like to see them focus on, or what would make you potentially excited about it? I guess we'll start with Liz.
I mean, I think what we've seen from it looks really beautiful. It looks a lot like a video game. It's built on Unreal Engine. It still maintains kind of a little tabletop aesthetic. It looks like it'll have an extensive building toolkit for dungeon masters. But I'm not real excited about it because it also looks very complicated. Adding a video game interface on top of this stuff could be kind of fussy. Most virtual tabletops are very fussy, just with the number of controls you have to have, the number of tokens and things you have to be able to put on a board that, you could just describe these things, but by putting them on a virtual tabletop, you need to add all of these details so what's happening on the board is clear. So I think the most important part in this, and I don't know whether this has it or not, is user friendliness. Is it easy to use? Can you jump in and just play like you would around a table? You have a miniature, you drag it around, and you don't have to go into all of this fussy stuff. But in all other digital tabletops out there, there's some fussy stuff. They require a lot of setup on the part of the DM, and they require some specialized knowledge on the part of the players. They are not always easy to use. So, can Wizards overcome that? I don't know, because a virtual tabletop inherently has to have a lot of tools to fit in with the options, to fit in with everything you can do.
Phil?
Frankly, if it is, this is a low bar to set. If it is easier for me as a DM to run an encounter than the current set of tools on D&D Beyond, then I am all in for. I will say we use the digital tools at our table because the place where we play, the guy has a display on the table. So we use the D&D Beyond Maps tool, and I'm running encounters in the D&D Beyond Encounters tool. And the disconnect is just so awkward. I'm flipping back and forth between two different tabs to move monsters. I have to manually rename every token to ensure that it goes along with the monster in the encounter builder because there's no connection between the two. I did... what we saw during so we got to look at this recently. I think this is what they were using during the D&D live at Gen Con, right? And it looks interesting, but I mean I think it has some work from prime time. I think if I can build interesting environments with it and run encounters easier, then that's really all I want out of it. But also, I mean. I guess we'll see. I also really hope that they focus on making it usable and not just being a route to sell you digital miniatures for $1 pop.
Yeah, the thing that I'm hoping to see is easy tools, right? Everybody's going to echo it, but I can't help but think of Neverwinter Nights. Neverwinter Nights.
Literally what I was just thinking. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh man.
That digital tool set changed how D&D was actually run back in the day, and it was released during 3rd edition. And it really changed sort of like the idea of what you can do in a digital space for Dungeons and Dragons. And part of that was because they did such a amazing job with the tools. The tools were very easy to use, very intuitive, and let you be extraordinarily creative with the assets that they had in game. I'm curious to see if we can ever get to something even remotely close to that again. And I can tell you, Roll20 ain't it. Fantasy Grounds ain't it. So if they can get somewhat close to that, I think it would be absolutely fantastic. The other thing I'm really going to be curious in is the audio stuff. And I've talked about this before. One of the things that I really enjoy doing with games when I have a little more setup time, can actually sit down and do this, is I love Sirenscape. I love making custom soundboards for encounters or adventures, and having things like background music, sound effects, spell effects, things like that to add a level of immersion, not just for the players, but for me. It makes me a little more excited. I want to see what they're going to do with that. If they're going to have something that does it, or if they're still going to be looking for third party, and whether or not they're going to allow third party access to the virtual tabletop in any capacity. We'll see. I don't know what else to say beyond that, because a lot of it is unknown. Go ahead.
I will say that at D&D Direct last week, they did mention bringing other games to this tool set, to like being able to play other types of games in it. But that was it. Was a brief mention. There were no details.
Yeah, and I'm curious about that, because the other thing that we know happened is Roll20 and everything that happened there, they have Demiplane now, right? And Demiplane is sort of like, oh, here's everything that isn't D&D. At least that's the way it's sort of poised, right?
And they also own Drive Through RPG. They bought a map making tool. They've got a lot right now.
Yeah, so I'm very curious to see where this goes and what the future of it holds, because this is another opportunity for them to knock something out of the park, but they're going to have to do something more than just, here's our version of a tabletop game or tabletop experience. It's like everything else but ours. So we'll see, I guess. Matt, did you have anything else you wanted to add before we move on?
I mean, I was going to say basically, I want you guys to look back at Neverwinter Nights. If this isn't easier to use and more full-featured than a game that came out in like 2000, then you've effed up. You need to at least be that good. And I mean, who knows? I don't know. Maybe they are. Maybe it will be. I hope they understand what they have here, the potential that they could have. You know, that's it. That's all I have to say on this one.
Yeah. I think we get a little bit of time left to quickly go through some other things that are releasing that are not D&D related. One, Green Ronin, who's been around for quite a while and has produced a lot of stuff in the tabletop space, has a new release for Expanse coming out, which is going to be Trades of the Expanse Pirate. So if you've ever wanted to play a pirate in the Expanse game, well, here's going to be your complete book to do so. I don't know if anybody here plays the Expanse. Phil, I think you might be one of the few people that would, besides myself.
I haven't, but I've read the books and watched most of the show. I really dig The Expanse. I think it's funny how the loop took it from tabletop RPG to book back to tabletop RPG.
We live in a weird space. One that I think is very near to me in the tabletop miniature space, Steam Forged Games, which is another large name in the tabletop industry, has bought Privateer Press, the makers of War Machine and Hordes and Warcaster and the tabletop RPGs as well for those settings. And they're doing what we've talked about before with, even though the fact that they're a large game, they're releasing stuff with Kickstarter backing. It's interesting because Privateer, before they got bought out, was switching to almost a pure on-demand digital production for their miniatures, where the stuff that they were putting out or sending to you, and I have one sitting on my desk right now, was industrial 3D printed in resin, as opposed to traditional casting, which allowed them to essentially not have the overhead of very expensive platinum plates for injection molding. And some people love it, some people hate it. And Steamforged Game is keeping that going, as well as bringing back their old paint line, the P3 paints. So I'm very interested in seeing what happens with that in the future, because I still love myself some miniature games, and I still love painting those damn things. And I'll kick this over to, I don't know who put this in, but I guess the Foundry Virtual Tabletop is kickstarting Ember? What's this?
It's really kind of interesting because it is simultaneously a D&D 5e game, and it's also not. It is sort of also their own new game. It's really, they've got their own rule system for it. They've got like what is essentially a campaign thing. It's all digital. This is all releasing digital. None of it's going to be like, as far as I can tell, none of it's going to be pen and paper. So I don't actually know much about it. Like, I just saw the Kickstarter the other day. I've been looking at it and thinking, what the heck is this thing? And they're doing a really good job of emulating Wizards of the Coast's marketing approach, in that I learn nothing the more I read. Like, when Liz was saying that, I'm like, wow, okay, did somebody over at Foundry Virtual Tabletop decided, yeah, we're going with that. We don't want people to understand what we're going for, because I don't know. They've even got what looks to be like an actual play happening simultaneously with it. It feels like they saw Daggerheart and were like, man, we got to get us some of that, but don't know what we're doing or why we're getting some of that or what some of that we're going to get is. But it does look interesting and kind of cool at the same time. Like, if you look at the stuff they do have up, there's a lot of really interesting stuff there. So I have no idea, but I'm interested.
The art on the Kickstarter looks really pretty. I'll be interested to see how this works, because this is actually the second time I've seen something like this.
Yeah.
I don't know if you guys are familiar with Burn Bright at all.
I know of it very vaguely.
Yeah, Burn Bright is from ages ago at this point in internet times, where Roll20 basically, I don't remember if they Kickstarter, but I know they developed an entire rule set and setting, and maybe even some adventures in a custom system that you can only get on Roll20. And if you pay for it, all you do is you get access to it on Roll20. And that is what this reminds me of, except with way, way more art assets. But then there's a little box there in the art, and I'm like, is this a symbolic box, or do I actually get a physical product with this? And Matt, I've been through this Kickstarter twice, and I do not have an answer to that question.
Yeah, it really doesn't feel like they want either they don't know or they don't want you to know. I don't know how else to put this. It's bizarre. It reminded me a little bit of that thing that Monty Cook did, the Invisible Sun game.
Oh God, the cube.
Yeah, the cube. It's like the virtual cube. If anything, it's weird. I find it very strange.
Oh, you can get the cube. I've seen the cube. You can theoretically play what's inside it, but Invisible Sun is such a weird game.
Yeah, it is not an easy game to play. But yeah, so I saw this and I thought that with the talk of Wizards finally getting their act together on their VTT, it's worth seeing what other VTTs are doing in response to this.
Yeah, this feels like the reverse, right? This is a VTT going, well, we can make a game.
Yeah, exactly. Like, oh, you're going to make your own VTT, then we're going to make our own game. So yeah, that's kind of where it seems to have gone. I have no idea what the game's going to be like. So yeah.
And then last but certainly not least, Modifius, who is just this weird tabletop company. And I want to talk about this because I forgot about this. And then Matt put this in here and it reminded me. They are releasing, or going to be releasing, a tabletop role-playing game based off of a 1970s UK sci-fi series called Space 1999, and I just want to read the excerpt from this because I think it's absolutely hilarious. A cataclysmic accident has sent Earth's moon hurtling into space, leaving behind a broken planet. Life has become a fight for survival for the people of Moonbase Alpha, as their journey takes them far deeper into the universe than they ever thought possible. Take part in a journey full of danger, wonder, and mystery as one of the dedicated crew of Moonbase Alpha on their search for a new home. Play an adventurous pilot, a stalwart security guard, a bold commander, an audacious medic, or any of one of the 300 Alphans. Whatever you choose, each mission puts the future of Moonbase Alpha in your hands. What will you do to rise to the challenge on the frontier of space? In the far distant future of 25 years ago.
Yes, exactly. I'll be upfront with you. I put this on there partially because Modifus has already been doing weird stuff like the Planet of the Apes game that they kickstarted, and now they're doing this. And it's like, if you remember the Thunderbirds, like the puppets.
This is. I would like it noted that Planet of the Apes is not Modifius.
Oh, okay, sorry, but it's still, that was coming out, and now they're doing this, which is again by the same people that made Thunderbirds and other puppet-heavy games. It's crazy. It's really strange to see Space 1999, which I remember. I watched Space 1999, so to see. This is not a game I expected to exist ever.
And to be fair, I want to put this out there. Like, Modifius does a lot of out there stuff, but also some mainstream stuff as well, using their 2D20 system. So you have Octoon Cthulhu, you have Dishonored, the video game Dishonored in tabletop form using the 2D20 system, Dune, Fallout, the Infinity one, which is a tabletop miniature game that now has a role-playing game that's based in their system. John Carter of Mars, as well as Star Trek, are all settings that they have in their 2D20 system. They really are like trying to poise themselves to become like the de facto system for sci-fi adventures, which is interesting with, Starfinder coming out. But I think it's really interesting to see that stuff. And I am looking forward to this. I love stuff like this. This is a 100% something that I am going to pick up, and I will try to get people to play, because if I have any excuse to do anything that sounds like an old VHS recording from the 90s, I am 100% going to do of
Also, I want to point out, Modifius is finally expanding the 2D20 system outside of sci-fi games, and in a Venn diagram of interests that I think includes only me, they are making a Heroes of Might and Magic tabletop RPG using the 2D20 system. There is nothing about it on this page other than it exists, but I want it.
Yeah, and I mean, Heroes of Might and Magic is like, it's almost perfect because it is like a video game for people who want weird. I honestly don't know how to explain this. Like, when it came out, it was very much almost avant-garde.
Well,
and now you've got a tabletop RPG in interpretation of it. There's some nutty stuff coming out.
And I'm hoping that does well, though, with the fantasy stuff, because they have the license, the exclusive tabletop license for a couple other things that I think are absolutely amazing. Like the Lord of the Rings tabletop RPG, Modifius has the rights for that. So they have the One Ring, the Lord of the Rings, but they also have Discworld.
Yeah.
They do, yes.
Which I would love to see, like, the fantasy side of the 2D20 system pick up, because the current games that they have for those are a little like old school complicated sci-fi TTRPG book space, and I'd love to see them moved into the 2D20 system. But like, I'm all about this. I love like weird, like esoteric role-playing games.
What's really too weird about this one, and if you remember this setting, if you ever watched the show, it had like some decent acting on it. Like, as much as it was made by the people that made Thunderbirds and other such, the stuff that inspired Team America, if you don't know what I'm talking about. Martin Landau was on this. You know what I mean? It's like, it's kind of nuts that this even exists, much less that it then got an RPG.
I don't think Modifius is any stranger to eclectic things. I mean, this is the company that is technically now publishing Morkborg. So
yeah,
they are.
Exactly.
They are absolutely publishing Morkborg.
And also, Modifius is the company that made it possible for James Olin to make his weird, Odyssey of the Dragon Lords, and then his Raiders of the Serpent Sea. If you don't know who James Olin is, he was a big deal at BioWare back in the when it was making Baldur's Gate and Baldur's Gate 2, and he's also currently the head of Wizards of the Coast's video game studio making the game Exodus. So he's also, when he's not doing that, he's just making role-playing game settings and publishing them via Modifius.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of really odd stuff going on.
We commented on this before, and I think that this is just further driving the point home. We are living in a time where, maybe partially due to the follies of Wizards of the Coast and over the past few years, but maybe just because of accessibility and people's open-mindedness to sort of tabletop becoming extremely mainstream, over the last several years. I think that's pretty safe to say. You're getting an opportunity to see a bunch of this stuff, sort of all the weird stuff, all the like stuff that you would not expect being released. And also, like, I've talked about this before, but like Girl by Moonlight and stuff like that, where like you can play as a sailor scout.
Well, Liz, what was the one you talked about? Sense and Sensibility and Sentai or something?
That was one that was
Sentai and Sensibility. Yes.
Yep.
Yeah, that's the one that every time someone talks about weird RPG stuff, that comes to mind to me immediately. And to me, it feels like since D&D is so mainstream now, you got to make a lot of effort to go back to being really weird and niche in this hobby.
But the accessibility to the weird and niche now is way different than it used to be, which means that they have an opportunity to be successful.
The opportunity to publish something weird and niche is there, no matter how weird and niche you think your thing is. Which is
there might be somebody who's going to go Space 1999, yeah.
But
like for instance, me.
I think the important takeaway though is because it is so mainstream now, people are looking for this stuff. So that means that like you have a better chance of finding your audience for that niche product than you did years ago, which I think is really cool. So like, our variety of choice is ever expanding, and we don't necessarily have to purely worry about the 9,000-pound gorilla of the tabletop role-playing space being the only game in town anymore, which is really neat and gives us, like, it's just a good time to be a tabletop role-playing nerd, right? Like, we can do essentially whatever we want, as I sit here still staring at my G.I. Joe, Transformers, and Power Rangers books on the shelf that are all set in the same universe. Just throwing that out there. So I don't know if there's anything else you guys want to talk about. I think we can sort of bring it home there, unless there's anything else. All right. Well then, friends, thank you very much for joining us on this episode of Tavern Watch. We're going to try to do these a little more regularly so we can maybe have a little bit less of a glut of news to go through. But until next time, friends, may all your hits be crits and may you pass every saving throw.